Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that is honestly hard to believe. It sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster, a U.S. military strike in Venezuela and the capture of its president. Yeah, you heard that right. Let's get into it.
So, where did all this begin? Right here, with this absolute bombshell of a post on Truth Social from former President Donald Trump. I mean, just read that. An American military operation against a sovereign nation and a sitting head of state captured. This is a huge deal, so let's break down exactly what we know so far.
All right, so first up, a shocking announcement. Let's look at what we actually know about this U.S. operation, at least according to them. Okay, so according to those initial reports, this was a really swift, decisive action. We're talking about a short, pretty intense strike that ended with the capture of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. And then, boom, they were apparently flown right out of Venezuela. Now, here's where it gets interesting. It was billed as a joint operation with U.S. law enforcement. That's a really important detail because it suggests this was being framed not just as, an act of war, but almost like a criminal justice operation.
But while all this was being announced in the US, what was actually happening on the ground? Let's switch gears and look at the chaos in Caracas based on reports from people who were right there.
So this was anything but a quiet surgical strike. For people in Caracas, it was absolute chaos. Imagine being jolted awake by violent explosions, the power going out, especially near military bases, and then hearing the roar of low-flying aircraft overhead. And look, this wasn't just rumors spreading on social media. The Associated Press very quickly verified video that showed tracer fire lighting up the night sky and smoke pouring over the capital. So how did the Venezuelan government react? Well, their response was immediate and frankly defiant. They declared a state of external disturbance, flat out accusing the U.S. of a broad attack on not just military sites, but civilian targets too. And they immediately called on their supporters to mobilize and take to the streets. Okay, this brings us to the million-dollar question, right? Why? Why would the United States take such an unbelievably dramatic step? Well, Washington laid out its official reasons for the strike. So the administration's whole justification basically rests on these three big pillars. First, to combat illegal migration. Second, to stop drug trafficking. And third, to dismantle what they're calling narco-terrorism. These three things together, that's the official U.S. case for this extraordinary military action. Let's start with migration. And to understand this, you have to look at the numbers, which are just staggering. We're talking about an estimated 8 million Venezuelans who've had to flee their countries since 2013, mostly because of the economic collapse and political turmoil. Now, Trump directly tied this crisis to U.S. national security. He accused Maduro of, and this is a quote, emptying his prisons and insane asylums to send people over the U.S. border. It's a claim, by the way, that Caracas has totally denied. All right, so the second and third reasons, drugs and narco-terrorism, they're really, really connected. The U.S. has officially designated two Venezuelan criminal groups as foreign terrorist organizations, or FTOs. You've got Tren de Aragua and then the Cartel de los Soles. But the allegation gets way more serious because Trump is claiming that the Cartel de los Soles is actually led by President Maduro himself. A huge accusation. Okay, so that's the official story from Washington's perspective. But as you can probably guess, Caracas has a completely different take on what happened. Their counter-narrative reframes this entire conflict. And this slide just lays it out perfectly, right? You've got this massive clash of narratives. On one side, Washington says this is a necessary part of the war on drugs. But on the other, Caracas is arguing, no, 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 you're just weaponizing the war on drugs as a convenient excuse to do what you've always wanted, regime change. And at the very heart of Venezuela's counterclaim is this accusation from Maduro. He says the real reason for all this isn't drugs or migration at all. It's about getting access to Venezuela's massive oil reserves. And here's a really interesting piece of context. Just days before the strike, Maduro's government had apparently made offers to cooperate with the U.S. on both drug trafficking and migration. The timing is notable. Now, it's so important to understand that this shocking event really didn't happen in a vacuum. This was the climax of months and months of escalating pressure and military posturing by the United States in the region. So let's just walk through how things escalated, step by step. First, you had this huge U.S. naval and air presence building up in the Caribbean. We're talking an aircraft carrier, the whole 9 yards. Then, U.S. forces seized 2 Venezuelan oil tankers at sea, which is a major economic blow. After that, the conflict turned deadly.
U.S. forces started striking small boats they accused of drug trafficking, and over 100 people were killed. And then finally, the pressure campaign crossed this huge line, the first acknowledged U.S. strike on Venezuelan soil itself. And this is the crucial legal argument the U.S. is using to justify everything we just talked about. Officially, Washington says it is not at war with the nation of Venezuela. No, instead, they claim to be in a formal, armed conflict, specifically with the drug cartels that operate there. Now, that might sound like a small difference, but it's a distinction that has absolutely massive implications under international law. So, this is where we are now. A sitting president has been captured and literally removed from his country by a foreign power. The justifications from both sides are in total opposition. The whole situation is incredibly volatile, and it leaves us with a really profound and unsettling question for the entire world. What happens next?